Let's open up a new tab, search Create T3 app. Click on this GitHub link here. And if we scroll down, we can see everything about Create T3 app. We can see that the stack consists of Next.js, TRPC, Tailwind, TypeScript, Prisma, and Nextauth. And then to get started, we can go ahead and copy this line here. I'm using PNPM, but if you're using Yarn or NPM, you'll copy one of these guys. Let's go ahead and open up our terminal. Paste that guy in. I'm gonna call it floating chat app. I'm gonna use TypeScript. And then you can toggle any of these, but we're gonna use all of them. And then we're just gonna let this install. Okay, now that that's done, let's go ahead and cd in. Open it up. Let's open up the terminal and run pnpm-dev. Then we can navigate to our browser. Go to localhost 3000. And this is what you get straight out the box. Let's go ahead and go back to our terminal and then check out what we have. So we have our Prisma directory, schema Prisma. This is where we define our Prisma schema. And so right now it has a couple models for Nextauth. So we have an account, a session, a user, and a verification token model. And we also have an example model up here. Then we have our public directory. And so here we have our favicon, and that is for our browser tab here. Okay. Then we have a source, env, schema MJS. So this is where we define our environment variable schemas for our server and our client. And then we have client MJS and server MJS, which actually parses our environment variables. And then it'll throw an error if they're invalid or missing. And if it's successful, then it'll pass those along. Then we have pages, API, auth, Nextauth. And so here, this is where we actually configure our Nextauth. So we have callbacks up here, where we're actually passing the user ID to our session user. We have an adapter where we're passing our Prisma client. And then we have providers. And so right now we have a Discord provider, but you also can have a Google provider or a Facebook provider or an email provider for email sign-ins, which we're going to do later. Then we have our TRPC. And this is where we actually define our next API handler, and we're passing our app router and our create context. So this is how we're actually able to call our router endpoints from Nextauth. Then we have examples, which is a route that calls a query on our Prisma example model. And then it returns those examples along with the status of 200. We have restricted, which gets our server session. And then if we have a session, then it's going to return a message that you can access this content because you're signed in. But if we don't have a session, then we're going to get the message that we must be signed in to view the protected content. So we actually can test this if we go here and say API/restricted. Then we get the you must be signed in to view the protected content error. And I should mention that anything that goes to API/auth goes here. Same with API/TRPC. And then same with examples and restricted as we just saw. Okay, then we have our _app TSX, which is the entry file for our app. And so we're wrapping it in a session provider that's provided by Nextauth. And we're also wrapping it in a higher order TRPC component. And so that way we can call our TRPC routers. And then we have an index.tsx. And this is our initial page that we see. So we see our Create T3 app, and we see the cards with Next.js, TypeScript, Tailwind, and all that jazz. So that's this page here. Okay. Then we have our server, common, get server auth session. And so here we're just calling unstable get server session from Nextauth. And that's how we're able to call or get our session here and our restricted API. Then we have DB client. And then here we're just declaring a global Prisma client. And so that way we don't have to keep on creating new Prisma clients every time we need to query our database. Then we have TRPC. Here we're declaring a TRPC instance. Then we're declaring router, which is tRouter. Public procedure, which is tProcedure. Then we're declaring a protected procedure, which is tProcedure, and it's using a middleware. And that middleware is essentially saying, if we don't have a session or a session user, then we're going to throw an error that says unauthorized. But if we do have that session and user, then we're just going to go ahead and pass that along to our context. And so that way we can infer that our session is non-nullable. And then we have context, and this is where we're creating our context. And so that way we can access Prisma and our session and our routers. Then we have router, app.ts. And so we're creating a router that consists of example router and auth router. And in the auth router, it has two endpoints. One is get session, that's a public procedure, and it's a query. And we're returning our session from our context. And then we have get secret message, which is a protected procedure. It's also a query. And we're returning a string that says you are logged in and can see the secret message. And then for our example router, here we have two endpoints as well. One is hello, it's a public procedure. It takes an input, that's an object, it has a text property, and that is a string, and it's also nullish, meaning it could be null or undefined. It's a query, and we're returning an object with a greeting property that says hello, and that input text that we passed, or hello world if we didn't pass anything. And then we have get all, which is a public procedure. It's also a query, and it's calling a Prisma query on our example model and returning those examples. Okay, then we have styles, global CSS. Here we're passing CSS for Tailwind. Then we have types, nextauth-d. Here we declare our types for nextauth. So here you can see that we're saying that the session should have a user ID. And we can also say the user should have a theme, a type light or dark for our session. We'll get into that later. And then we have utils, TRPC. This is where we create our TRPC instance for Next.js. And you can see our API URL here. Then we have next-envd, a next config, package JSON, pnpm lock, post CSS config, Prettier config. We're passing the Prettier plugin for Tailwind, so that way our class names are organized. Then we have a readme.md, Tailwind config, so we can extend Tailwind, and our TypeScript config. So I know I went through this pretty fast, but hopefully it'll make sense as we start building it out.